But we can all see the enthusiasm. I'd now like to welcome to the stage Ms Ellen Sandell, the State MP for Melbourne, current member of the Legislative Assembly and a member of the Greens Party. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom and Barbara, for the invitation. I love representing Melbourne, and I love living here, as I'm sure all of you do. And I am so proud that we constantly top the polls in the world's most livable city, as I'm sure we all are. I think when those articles turn up in The Age, they get the most clicks of any. But this huge growth we're seeing in the city is absolutely threatening that livability. And I might go a little bit harder in my speech than some of the others have about what I think actually needs to change and what some of the barriers have been to date. Because I am really quite worried about the future of our city. We've seen incredible growth in the last decade. If you take the federal electorate of Melbourne and compare it to the federal electorate of Kooyong, which is right next door, which includes suburbs like Kew and Hawthorn and Baldwin, in the 10 years, 2004 to 2014, the increase in density we saw in Kooyong was 9%. The density increase that we saw in Melbourne was 41%. And so you see this huge growth that we're getting in our very inner suburbs, particularly around the Docklands and the CBD. And maybe this wouldn't be a problem if we had the infrastructure and the community services to keep up with it and the policies and the laws to keep up with it, but we haven't. And just a few examples, the trams in the city, if you try and catch the route number 8 from Carlton into the inner city in the morning, those trams are constantly at 150% capacity. So a third of the people waiting on that platform to get on that tram cannot get on that tram in peak hour no matter what. We're seeing issues like school provision falling far behind. I've toured the North Melbourne Primary School and it's completely over capacity. And then in the Docklands here, kids have no school to go to whatsoever, despite years of reviews and statistics showing that it's needed and showing that families actually want to live here in the Docklands, and yet we still don't have a school, and it's something that the Greens have been agitating for, but little action to date apart from opening reviews. And of course, if you look at something like childcare, my colleague Adam Bant, his office does a childcare survey every term of Parliament, and the most recent one showed that for kids aged 0 to 2, 76% of places had no vacancies whatsoever, and only 3% of places had vacancies every day. So if you have a child aged 0 to 2 within the city of Melbourne, good luck to you at finding childcare. So of course I could go on and on with those problems, but it's just to highlight that governments have not kept up with the kinds of services and policies that we need to keep Melbourne that proud, livable city that I want to live in and that I want to represent. And when it comes to high-rise apartments, of course, now we're seeing a whole raft of issues catch up with policymakers. You may have seen a recent article in The Age a couple of days ago. A survey was done by a not-for-profit group that showed 20% of investor properties in Greater Melbourne are empty. They looked at the water use across the different water authorities and saw that 20% use virtually no water at all, which means that those properties are unoccupied. And we're also, of course, seeing this issue now, that the reason that you're all here predominantly around short stay apartments and our homes essentially being apartments that were supposed to be homes and were built for homes essentially being turned into hotels. And this is not the trajectory that the city should go down. A house isn't just another commodity. It's not just like a sack of grain or an ounce of gold. A house is a home, and people need places to live, and having a home is a fundamental human right. And as we all know, having a safe, secure home is what enables people to live good lives, to get employment, to stay healthy. All of these issues are so fundamentally tied up into having a safe place to live. We cannot let housing just become an economic issue. It is fundamentally a social issue, and it is about homes, not just about investments. And so I don't want to see Melbourne go from the world's most livable city to the world's most ghost-like town, or I don't want people to live in small boxes where we don't know our neighbours. That's not the kind of city that I want to represent. I want to live in a community, not a shopping mall, not an investment town. I want to live in a community, and I think that's why you're all here today as well. So I've spoken about this issue, and particularly around short stay apartments in Parliament several times, and I've been quite disappointed at the result that we've got. And I want to acknowledge Sally, who's in the audience, who first brought this issue to my attention more than a year, nearly 2 years ago, several years ago. And thank you for bringing it to my attention, because it is this sleeping giant, as I think all the panellists have acknowledged. But we also need to acknowledge what are the barriers that are standing in the way to getting action. Because while it is a complex issue in many ways, governments can deal with complexity. Governments can deal with issues like this. Governments around the world have grappled with issues like this. And what is standing in the way really at the moment, I believe, is political will to get this done. Governments are smart. There are many smart people working in government. I believe that they can sort it out. So some of the things that we have done recently, we've announced this plan for a more livable Melbourne. I didn't expect so many of you here today, so I haven't brought a copy for everybody. But if you want an overview of the Greens' policies around livability, this is a good place to start. I believe another thing that is holding us back is the hold that developers have over our city. As Rohan mentioned, we have the lowest developer contribution scheme in the whole country, so developers aren't really paying their fair share for community infrastructure. But also we have a system where developers are still able to donate to political parties and to council candidates. So we have a petition going at the moment to ban developer donations, and I have some of these if you'd like to sign it. Last week in Parliament on Wednesday, I introduced a bill to ban donations from property developers to political parties and council candidates, and for all political donations to be disclosed immediately so we can see who is funding our political parties, mine included, rather than having to wait 18 months until an election's called. We still don't know who funded the previous election because it won't be released until February. Unfortunately, all the three old parties, Nationals, Liberal and including Labor, voted down that bill and voted to not even allow it to be debated. So we couldn't even have this debate in Parliament, which is, I think, begs the question, what do these political parties have to hide? And are they looking after their developer friends, or are they here for residents? Similarly, with my motion to ask the Minister to look into banning short stay apartments and to respond to the short stay panel, that motion was put to Parliament a couple of months ago, I think now, and that has not been allowed to be debated in Parliament either. I've put several questions to the Minister for Consumer Affairs, Jane Garrett, on the record in terms of short stay apartments and what she'll do about it, in particular because I know that many residents were quite unhappy with the panel and the non-recommendations essentially that came out of it. But those questions have not yet been answered, and my statements in Parliament have not been answered either. So this is a complex issue, granted, but if you look at somewhere like San Francisco, they've managed to grapple with it. And there was a lot of talk today about balance. We need to balance the sharing economy and tourism with the rights of residents. Well, San Francisco had the same problem. They are also a very large tourist town. And I think that they've struck a fairly decent balance in my mind. They've said that, look, the sharing economy shouldn't be about a new untaxed hotel business. The sharing economy should be about genuinely peer-to-peer sharing and allowing people to access resources like spare bedrooms that you wouldn't otherwise. So what they've said is you can only use that sharing economy like Airbnb to let out your apartments if you are a genuine resident of that apartment. So if you own your own apartment and you live there, or you're a tenant there, and you want a carer to come in for a week, or you go away and you want someone to come and pet sit, or you go away and you want to rent out your room for a week, that's okay, provided that you're the primary resident, that you live there for something like more than 200 days a year, and provided that you don't do it for more than 90 days in that year. So you are still the primary resident, you're still a member of that community, and so you still have the responsibility for what your guests do, but you cannot go and just buy an apartment and turn it into an untaxed hotel. And I think that's the problem that we're seeing here, and that's the kind of balance we need to be looking at, the Minister needs to be looking at. How do we enable people to still have carers and pet sitters and rent out their apartment for a week once a year, but not just turn homes into hotels, because that's not the kind of city we want to live in. And it also goes to housing affordability. In San Francisco, they had a huge problem with houses and residential buildings being turned into hotels and essentially low-income tenants being booted out. And that's not the kind of situation we want here in Melbourne as well. So I am really pleased that you have started this group. As I've said to Barbara and others, change doesn't just happen because politicians wake up one day and think, oh gosh, I had the wrong idea all along, I'm going to change my mind. Change happens because people agitate, people organise, they get together, they lift their voices, they have their voices heard, and they don't take no for an answer, they don't go away. So thank you for being here, thank you for not going away. I look forward to working with you over hopefully only the next couple of months until we solve this problem, but it may be slightly longer than that. I'm here to support you in this campaign. I fundamentally believe that we need to live in a community and that houses should be homes, not hotels. So thank you for taking up the fight, because the change won't happen without you.